Okay, this is an addendum to the Psalm 90 series. I am going to show how Moses is using his meter to account from Adam all the way to the end of time. I wasn't sure how to describe it in the earlier videos, and I'm reasonably sure of it now. If you can see a better explanation than this, I'm all ears. Okay. You see in front of you Psalm 90 in the top window, and in the bottom window you see my Genius XLS worksheet, which is the historical timeline that I got solely from the Bible's verses. And it begins with Adam at his fall. What Christians mistake when they go to date the Bible and everything is they don't understand that God starts measuring Adam's days when he falls. You don't get numbered days until there's a fall. Adam's days were not numbered until he fell. My pastor made a big point about that, and you can see it, but you can't see it in English in the funny Hebrew use of the min preposition in Genesis 3:22. And in my Genesis videos, I go through that. Min is a birthing preposition. It's used very stridently throughout the Bible to signify being beyond, apart from, out from. And unfortunately, all the womb verses are mistranslated, so you can't tell that that's what God is saying. In all the womb verses, nearly all of them, God is talking about you being a you at birth. And he uses the min preposition, chiefly mi betin and mi merekum. And I haven't finished all my pro-life blasphemy videos on that, but when I do, you'll see it, because I'm going to take you pan Bible and show you all those verses. So he uses it so much that when he says min by itself, he's talking about a birthing. And in Genesis 3:22, Adam is born on his own, away from God. It's very witty in the Hebrew. So the numeracy of the Bible begins at Adam's fall. So year of the world 0 is the very beginning of the year in which Adam fell. That's when his days start to be numbered. Now, God's convention for time grants is actually referenced very stridently in Psalm 90 and Isaiah 53. And we're going to go through that and see that here in this video, because that's how you're going to understand why Psalm 90 is metered the way it is. It's very clever. Okay, but I first have to acquaint you with those rules, because Christendom doesn't know anything about this doctrine. It's a doctrine. It is not Bible codes. It's a way of remembering how to measure time. And Moses taught this to Israel. Of course, that was known before, because it began with Adam. So let's go through Adam, because Moses is measuring his meter from Adam. Okay, Adam falls at the beginning of the year. That's in cell G13 at the bottom of the bottom window of the worksheet. Okay, the goal is that somebody within the 490-year period, look at the very bottom middle of the screen, somebody by the end of the first 490 years after Adam's fall has to super mature. Okay, I covered this in the Genesis videos beginning in episode 8C1. But here we're going to look at it from a much different perspective, from how Moses is using the same accounting. Adam was the guy who did that. He super matured 130 years after his fall. That's why Seth is born in the year 130 after Adam's fall. It signifies that Adam met the supermaturation requirement. You know that because there's a 490-year period between Seth's birth and Shem's birth right here. Okay? I think it was him and Shem. No, I'm sorry. I got it wrong. Enoch, right here. Okay, one's born early in the year, one's born late in the year. That's why it seems like it's 492. Okay, but it's 490 for accounting purposes. So Seth is born to commemorate Adam's reaching supermaturity, and Enoch is born to commemorate Jared's reaching supermaturity. Jared was Enoch's dad. Alright, so the point is that by the time this 490 years elapsed, there was somebody, in this case Adam, who supermatured, and it could have been all of them in the list. It could have been Seth and Enosh and Kenan and Machalel, but the Bible is just only tracking the one, and that's Adam. Alright, now notice this is really important to understand how Moses meters. Right after the 490 is a 70-year voting period for believers to vote. Moses is going to use that, and Isaiah will also, to track time. They're tracking by the voting period, so you are to understand that when they mention 70, that they're talking about the 490s, which went before the 70. Okay, it's ellipsis. It's a form of numeric ellipsis. The same kind of ellipsis is used by God in Daniel 9. It's also used by Isaiah in Isaiah 53, which you should have seen when you saw the Isaiah 53 videos. So the 490 is there. Then there's a voting period for believers, and if there are enough believers who want to know God, then the next 490 can grow somebody. So it's a two-sided voting question. First of all, there has to be one person who votes to super mature. God super matures him by the end of the 490 years. And then in tandem, believers have to want to know God enough to grow. If they do, then the next 490-year period begins in the 560th year. That's the key to understanding the meter in Psalm 90 and in Isaiah 53. And I'm sure in other passages, I just haven't checked, all the prophetic passages yet. So Moses begins his accounting as follows. Now go to the top window here. You have here the first 4 verses, which end with, days is 1,000 years. That's a decree. That's 84 syllables. It's on purpose that it's 84 syllables. That's a 70 plus 14. 14 will end up being the number of years that Israel goes over the time barrier, the time allotment for her. And that's going to be really important because Isaiah and Moses both balance to that 14 years at the end of their respective chapters. Okay, so this part here is the decree. Isaiah will use 77 syllables. Moses is using 84. And it's deliberate to take into account the 14. Okay, I've explained that in the prior video, so you should remember that. Alright, now Moses is beginning the actual chronological accounting, but he's doing it from Adam. And he begins it right here. Look in the bottom screen. He's using this voting period in cell G20 between the 490th and the 560th year. So he starts with the 70 years. He's stressing voting. Alright? And that's this period right here, verses 5 through 8, which is 34 syllables plus 36 syllables. That comprises 70. So you were to understand that between verse 4, when a day is as 1,000 years, because the 1,000 years is also another accounting period, 490 plus 70 plus 490 equals 1050, and the last 50 years is for the unbelievers to vote. This 70 is stressing believer voting. So it's telling you, hi, there's a 490 that's sandwiched in between verse 4 and verse 5. Because verse 4 is the end of the decree, verse 5 is the beginning of the voting accounting. So now he's taking into account that first believer voting window, which is right down here in cell G20 at the bottom middle of your screen. Alright? So he's accounting by voting periods. Alright? Now, that takes you to the end of the first 70, which is, ends here at verse 8. Let me see if I can get the mouse to work. Okay? So at this point, you're looking at the end of the first 560 years of history since Adam's fall, which is represented here. So when you get to the end of verse 8, which is very clever when you consider what Moses is saying in those verses. When you get to, because he's talking about appointment and everything, return, blah, blah, blah. Okay, when you get to the end of verse 8, he has just finished telling you, hi, 560 years since Adam's fall, stop there. All right, then you're to understand that there is an insertion, because the new 490 can begin, but because of the way the 490 works, it's one 490, then a 70, then two 490s. Okay, so it's 1, 1, 2. So then right here is the end of the first 490. Let me see, I'm going to make that a big screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, first 490 ends here. That means the second one begins. The second 490 ends here. Excuse me. In G29, and that ends the first 1050. Remember, a year says 1,000 days. Well, he's measuring it, and then you have a voting period for the unbeliever. That is 50 years. So the second 490 then ends at 1050. All right, but then there's a third 490 because we haven't had our new voting period yet.